Temple Square and its buildings are a National Historic Landmark. Eliza R. Snow and Zina Young were both celebrated in funerals in the Assembly Hall on Temple Square. The funerals for Bathsheba Smith and Emmeline Wells were held in the larger tabernacle on Temple Square. The bodies of all four women were taken to their final resting place via this street. It is named South Temple because the street goes east and west along the south side of Temple Square. For a time, it was called Brigham Street for obvious reasons. The first building east of Temple Square was billed as the Hotel Utah in the early 1900s, on the site of former church buildings, including a tithing and a newspaper office. The current building is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This is where Emmeline Wells lived for the last few years of her life. Every U.S. president, from William Howard Taft to Ronald Reagan, stayed here, and many of their wives as well. Queens of Denmark and Norway have also been guests. Entertainment stars like Katharine Hepburn, Ginger Rogers, and Elton John were likewise among the visitors. My parents spent their wedding night here in 1955 while the Relief Society building was under construction just to the north. It is now called the Joseph Smith Building and has several restaurants and banquet rooms. It is primarily a social center for weddings, family reunions, and the like. The next building was built around the same time as the hotel. It is the church administration building where the church president and apostles have offices. These buildings are all currently closed because of the pandemic. Now we arrive at the house where Eliza lived with Brigham Young and a number of his other wives, including Zina, the General Relief Society president after Eliza. It is called the Lion House after the statue above the door. There is a restaurant down below now. It will open again to the public when the pandemic ends. My mother, Colleen, hosted children's birthdays in the upstairs area, and my great-great-grandmother, Elizabeth, came here frequently during the time when Brigham Young and Eliza and Zina were living here in order to visit and attend family prayers. The next home is the Beehive House, named after the motif representing the Book of Mormon, Deseret, and the industry of the honeybee. Together, these two homes make up the Brigham Young Complex, another National Historic Landmark. The Beehive House was Brigham Young's residence for one of his many families and served as a church administration building before the bigger one was built. Mark Twain came through these doors, as did Ulysses S. Grant, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Horace Greeley, and others. Brigham Young died here, as did two other church presidents, including Eliza R. Snow's brother Lorenzo, who lived here later when he was president of the church. And this is the Eagle Gate, which marked the entrance to Brigham Young's estate. This is a modern version of the wooden gate that stood here in the 19th century. Inside the gate was a schoolhouse for Brigham's many children. They say he had more than 50. We're going up to the next street to visit this family cemetery. I'll meet you there. This is First Avenue. Not long after the Latter-day Saints arrived in the valley, Brigham built a row of log homes in this area for his various families. Eliza R. Snow lived here for about 7 years in a log cabin as the people struggled to build a city. So in a way, it is fitting that her body would be returned here for burial. She was truly one of the great women of the 19th century, but she had some real challenges in life. Some scholars believe she was the victim of a gang rape in Missouri. She would have loved to have children of her own, but never did. Much of her poetry, however, was dedicated to comforting mothers who lost children, women who suffered tragedies of their own, or missionaries called to leave behind wives and children to preach in other lands. She twice entered into plural marriage, but never had the favored first wife status. She spent much of her life supporting herself economically in difficult circumstances by teaching or sewing, two professions that women were allowed to practice in her time. This is the first stop on the presidential grave pilgrimage. Our effort to pay our respects is frustrated on this occasion. Coronavirus had its effects here too, because just as with the houses of the Brigham Young complex, the gate to the Brigham Young family cemetery is locked. We look over the fence and we can see the pioneer statue and the monument with words and music of Eliza R. Snow's most famous hymn that included some revolutionary theological ideas. Listen to this excerpt from an early 20th century recording of the hymn.
In the health apparent single, no, the thought makes reason stare. Truth is reason, truth eternal. Tell me I've a mother there.
Since we can't get inside to see her tombstone on this day, we decide to go to the Pioneer Memorial Museum at the top of Main Street to see her statue. It has a plaque, and here we can read all the lyrics to her hymn, "O My Father." I once encountered a woman attorney on the elevator at the law firm where I worked in Madrid, Spain. She knew about my church and asked me, "Do you have anything in your religion like Mary and ours?" I started to say no, but then caught myself and said, "Yes, we do. We believe that God is married. We have a mother in heaven." That statement startled my colleague, and she responded something along the lines of, "Well, I don't see why not. God should have the right to be married too." I was pleased to discover at a later date that others had already seen a similarity between the Latter-day Saint belief originating with Eliza R. Snow's poem and the Roman Catholic doctrine about Mary. I hoped to have better luck at seeing the graves of later Relief Society presidents, and I did at the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Here lies Zina Young, a native New Yorker who was a wife to Joseph Smith and later Brigham Young. She lived with Eliza R. Snow for many years in the Lion House. Aunt Zina, as she was affectionately called, is buried here with some of her daughters. Her tombstone bears the motto of the Relief Society, something that she lived, especially in her efforts to visit the sick and the poor. She had an obedient nature and was noted for her service as the leading woman or matron of the Salt Lake Temple. At her funeral, her children sent a floral arrangement that consisted of a sheaf of wheat, the symbol of the Relief Society Wheat Gathering Project, along with red roses in the shape of a sickle, the harvesting tool. Another floral gift came from the Utah Silk Commission, where Zina served as president. It was an arrangement of a purple and white wreath tied up with some Utah-made white silk. As I read about her while growing up, I called the third general president Bathsheba. But my mother later informed me that in Relief Society leadership circles, she was called Bathsheba. She was born in Harrison County, Virginia, one of the counties that separated to become West Virginia so it could remain part of the Union at the time of the Civil War. She joined the church as a teenager and lived through the Missouri persecutions and the Illinois troubles. She was the youngest woman at the original organization of the Relief Society in Joseph Smith's red brick store, and the last surviving member of that original group. She was also the first woman to have her funeral held in the tabernacle on Temple Square. It was decorated in white, just like her predecessors, and the service included the singing of Eliza R. Snow's hymn, "O My Father." Emmeline Wells' funeral, like Bathsheba's, was held in a full tabernacle on Temple Square. The hymn, "O My Father," was also sung. She was affectionately called Aunt Em, but she also was known as Utah's Grand Old Lady and lived to age 93. Born in Massachusetts, she joined the church as a teenager and was a teacher in a log schoolhouse on 4th East in Salt Lake when she came to Utah. She loved nature and wrote a hymn about Utah's beauties, which she experienced firsthand while traveling throughout the state in a wagon to visit Relief Society groups. She became very influential in the campaign for women's suffrage. She and Zina Young's daughter spoke in Washington, D.C. at the convention of the National Women's Suffrage Association. She later was invited to speak at conventions in Iowa and at Westminster Abbey in London. Invited to attend the inauguration of President William McKinley, she certainly mourned when he was assassinated. However, when his vice president, Theodore Roosevelt, took over power in Washington, it was an important event for women's suffrage because as President Teddy Roosevelt, through his support behind the women's movement and voting for women soon became a reality throughout the United States. In addition to her work on the Wheat Committee, Aunt Em helped establish the Woman's Exponent, the first periodical for women in the West, and she authored several books. Emmeline wrote hymn lyrics praising Utah's natural beauties, observing that we can see God's hand in nature. She and Elizabeth Howard enjoyed some of that splendor while traveling together, and my great-great-grandmother's tombstone is near Emmeline's in the cemetery, so we made a brief detour on our presidential pilgrimage to visit Elizabeth's grave. In fact, we are here on Elizabeth's birthday, the 12th of July, for that very purpose. She was born 197 years ago in Carlow, Ireland. My son and I enjoyed the visit. Next on our tour is the tombstone of Clarissa Smith Williams. She was a daughter of George A. Smith, but Bathsheba was her stepmother, who had an important part involving Clarissa in the Relief Society. Clarissa was the offspring of another of George's wives, and she married a young man who immigrated from Wales before she became the first General Relief Society president to be born in Utah. She served for more than 7 years. It was back to the Assembly Hall for her funeral, but her successor, Louise Robison, was one of the speakers. We have to travel south nearly 40 blocks from the Salt Lake City Cemetery to visit the grave of Louise Yates Robison. She is buried in Wasatch Lawn Memorial Park. The grave is in a remote spot, and the headstones seem to have sunk a bit. Louise, or Louisa, was the daughter of 2 immigrants from England and was born in a log cabin in Scipio, Utah. Her mother was Ward Relief Society president and then the president of the Millard Stake Relief Society, so she had lots of exposure to Relief Society growing up. Louise died at the home of a daughter in San Francisco, but her funeral was also held in the Assembly Hall on Temple Square. The final tombstone we are going to visit today is that of Amy Brown Lyman, who is also buried in this same cemetery. She had been editor and manager of the Relief Society magazine for over 30 years and suffered some difficult challenges. Her daughter-in-law died unexpectedly, leaving a small child that Amy raised. Her son committed suicide, and her husband, an apostle, was excommunicated because he apparently wanted to engage in a polygamous relationship with another woman after the time when polygamy had been discontinued by the church. She served for 5 years, but continued strong in the faith after her release and returned to speak at the cornerstone ceremony for the Relief Society building.
The erection of this important building is one of the greatest achievements of the Relief Society. It is the culmination of the hopes, dreams, and prayers of the women of the past and the pride and joy of the women of today. And now, after these many years, we are to have a magnificent building of our own, our very own, greater and grander than was ever dreamed of, and surely worth waiting for. Here it stands, facing the Holy Temple and in close proximity to the headquarters of the church. Here it stands on ground which has been made sacred by the many historic events which have occurred here. on ground made sacred by the feet of those who have trodden here.
In researching where to find these graves, I discovered that Amy Brown Lyman's half-sister married the brother of my great-great-grandfather. They lived in the southern Utah town of Annabella, where Joseph Smith Staker was the bishop. Belle Spafford, the president who is in charge of raising money to build the Relief Society building, is buried in West Jordan at the Redwood Memorial Estate Cemetery. Her full name is Marion Isabel Sims Smith Spafford. There are several short video clips from the 1950s posted on YouTube by LDS Church History that are about the construction of the Relief Society building. The most interesting segments are about the groundbreaking and the cornerstone laying ceremony. You can easily find them by searching for Relief Society building. You can learn more about the presidents of the Relief Society in a 2008 book entitled Faith, Hope, and Charity, Inspiration from the Lives of General Relief Society Presidents by Janet Peterson and Lorene Gaunt. There are also Wikipedia articles about all of the presidents. My mother, Colleen, is buried in the Valley View Memorial Park, the same cemetery as the president she served with. Barbara Winder and her husband Richard are also buried at Valley View, located next to Winder Lane in West Valley.